So when you're multiplying decimals, the thing that matters the most is how many total digits you have behind the decimal place in both numbers. So if I look at the example, I have 7/100 times 8/10, or 0.07 times 0.8. So if I look, that's a total of 3 digits behind the decimal place, and we're going to keep that in mind for later. Then when you go to actually multiply, you multiply them as if they're not decimals. So a normal 7 times 8, which I know gives me 56. This is when that 3 comes back. Then we move the decimal once we have our numerical answer so that we have the same number of digits behind the decimal place. So I would move it a total of 3 spaces, and I would fill in any gaps with 0. So the answer to 7/100 times 8/10 would be 56 thousandths, or 0.056. Next, we'll look at if we had positives and negatives. So the only difference when multiplying positive and negative decimals is to remember your sign rules at the end. The process is still the same. If I was doing -8 times 74/100, I would first count how many total digits I have behind the decimal, which here would be 2. I'm going to keep that in mind for later. Then I would multiply it out as 74 times 8, so almost ignoring the decimals for a moment. Solving that through, that would give me 592. And here's where I bring that 2 back because I need 2 decimals behind. So the answer would be 5.92, but then I check my signs. I have a negative times a positive, so the answer would be a -5 and 92/100, or -5.92. Same would work if both numbers were not just 0 point something. So here I still have 2 behind my decimal place. I would set up my multiplication and work through that. And getting that total, kind of running out of space, would be 1,798. I'm going to move my decimal back 2 more spots and check my signs. A negative times a negative would leave my answer as a positive 17 and 98/100. So just to recap, we multiplied as if the decimals weren't there. What mattered most was how many total digits were behind the decimal place, and at the end, after we had calculated, we moved that decimal back. Dividing decimals is very different. We no longer care about how many total digits are behind the decimal place. Instead, what we need to focus on is the divisor and making it into a whole number. And that's so when we line up our division, the decimal point can stay lined up. So if I'm looking at this example, the thing I'm going to do first is move the decimal point so that that second number, the divisor, is a whole number. So looking here, that means I would need to shift it to the right 1 spot. And I'm actually going to turn that into 2. Well, whatever I do to one number, I have to do to the other as well. So I would take my 15, that decimal point is really right here, and shift it over once as well, which would really turn that into 150. So what's neat about decimals is 15 divided by 2/10 is equivalent or mathematically the same as 150 divided by 2. So I could set up my division and go through that. And get the answer of 75. So very, very different because with dividing, we're moving the decimal at the beginning, and you'll notice I did not move it back at the end. So I'm only moving it once, and with dividing, it's at the beginning. Of course, when I'm dividing with positive and negative decimals, the process is the same. I just always have to check my sign rules. So here we have a -13 and 8/10 divided by a positive 6/10. The divisor here is the number that matters. That tells me how many to move my decimal place. So here I would be moving it once, which means I have to move it once here as well. So this problem essentially turns into -138 divided by 6. Mathematically, those would have the same answer. So I'm going to set up my division, 6 on the outside, 138 on the inside. You'll notice I like to ignore my decimals while I'm working and just remember them at the end. So I'm going to go through this to get an answer of 23. Now with a negative divided by a positive, I know my final answer would be -23. Again, I'm not moving my decimal at the end because with dividing, we did that at the beginning. So in summary, when you're multiplying decimals, you count up how many total digits you have, and you move the decimal at the end. With dividing, you actually move the decimal at the beginning to turn that second number into a whole number, and then you don't move the decimal back when you're finished.